So, Jordan, this has been a long time coming because I generally believe that the episode we did, which is probably like the third episode of the show, and now we're like 182 episodes deep, it was both the best and the worst of the episodes I've ever done. Best because some of the stories and the clips that came out were unreal. Worse because I was new to podcasting and I got so lost in your stories that I was just like, caught off guard. So welcome back. It's really, really good to have you on the show. And I hope we get more random tangents and rants in this show that we did the last one.
Yeah, I aim to please, and if that's what pleasing looks like, I'm sure I can fulfill that. But no, man, happy to be back. Great to see you.
So, like, before we get into the main crux of like the training and nerd stuff that we're going to go into, one thing I thought was really, really interesting, because I think before we came on air, we spoke about how things have developed. We both got cool microphones now. You're traveling the world. And I talk a lot about to the coaches listening to this about becoming the authority. And you've generally, in a very, nothing's an overnight success, but in a short period of time, become the authority in the industry, in this fitness space. So what do you think, whether it's your upbringing, whether it's the love of hockey, what do you think made you so dedicated in this pursuit?
Because it's relatively easy when you think about what the rest of the world considers work. So it's like it's relatively enjoyable. So it's there are parts of it that are difficult, but if you grew up blue collar and you understand what difficult work is, and then you realize that like I really just own a lemonade stand on the internet. It's like my hardest day of work now, and likely unless I break bad and go work in a mine somewhere, my hardest day of work will be like multiple orders of magnitude easier than what I thought my easiest day of work was going to look like growing up. So it's like, yeah, you're a bit tired. You don't want to like type on the computer. You don't want to get on a plane. Like, if you keep a heavy dose of perspective, it's enjoyable. It superimposes with something that I like to do. And the other option was and will remain to be way worse. So it's like show a bit of gratitude and just keep doing the thing that you get to do. Like I don't understand like grind culture, at least in the fitness. I understand grind culture if you're a single mother. I understand grind culture if you're a prison guard. I understand grind culture if you're a building skyscraper, all of it. But it's like, what are we doing here, right? Like, give your fucking head a shake. So yeah, it's just I don't know. I enjoy doing it. There's a positive reinforcement loop that I seem to be just stuck in perpetually between airports and hotels and airplanes, and so I'm just kind of riding the wave.
I think that's the most humble answer you can give, but I don't entirely buy it. And I say that with love, knowing you are one of the most humble people I've ever met. But there are people in this industry that will do it because it's easier than what the alternative is. And they will sign up a few clients, give them a set of macros and tell them to go. You are traveling the world, going between airports and hotels, and you have dedicated God knows how much money and hours into studying. You're not taking the easy path with this. So what made you go so into the weeds with it?
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I think it was all maybe you may have hit the nail on the head with like my proximity to sport. Like I think, and you see this as a reflected in the company and our trajectory. It's like I'm really interested in like performance, and I don't necessarily. This is gonna be a bit of a I don't know obtuse conversation, but like I don't really consider bodybuilding in the aesthetic space performance because the problems you have to solve are pretty easy. And it's not that I don't enjoy bodybuilding. Like I'm probably one of a handful of people who remember having a subscription to Muscular Development magazine, where like a pieces of paper got delivered to your house once a month, and you couldn't wait to like do Dexter Jackson's 3x8 lateral raise shoulder. But so I do genuinely have a passion for bodybuilding and bodybuilding training, but like I always came up in the sports performance world where when you're not dealing with the subjective eyes of a panel of judges, what you're dealing with the clock or the measuring stick as the objective rate of improvement. It was it's just I've calibrated my problem solving skills off of a much more complex set of problems that you're trying to solve, right? It's not losing weight, calorie deficit, hormone balance or whatever comes with it. It's like, you look at someone prepping for a show and like, oh, I have a 16-week prep. It's like, what about a quadrennial training cycle? What about training for the Olympics across 4 years with a world championship punctuated in between every year? Like, how do you make these improvements in short and long term? So I think it really is my proximity to sport, now that I think about it, that it just recalibrated my perception of what's difficult. And
Mm.
I think so much of the fitness education space is inundated with body composition and these things that I think are a byproduct of true performance. And obviously, like, there's nuances to hypertrophy that are very unique to a very small few who may benefit from some of these approaches. But I just set my sights and my horizons on sports and performance and pro athletes of multiple disciplines and injury rehab and all the things that sort of come along with that. So yeah, I think it's just really by proxy of that focal point that I've just there's so much more to learn in those arenas than sort of in the and not, some of my closest friends are Olympia level bodybuilders and, well, Mr. Olympia. I'll go, I see Derek Lunsford a handful of times a year, and it's not to be disparaging against them, but even, Derek comes from like a wrestling background, and he could tell you the difference between bodybuilding and sport training. So I think that's fundamentally it. I think my main trajectory has always been drawn towards sport performance, where the number of variables are incalculable and ever changing compared to just the body composition, muscle hypertrophy crowd.
Do you think there's an element of control here that you quite like in the performance world? Like you mentioned blue collar earlier on, maybe a lot of people you grew up around didn't have the element of control of where they were necessarily going in life. And then you mentioned bodybuilding being this subjective panel, whereas if I'm doing 100 meters in 14 seconds, how do I get that down to 11? Is it the ability that we can track and show that what we are doing is improving, which makes the programming for it more exciting for you?
Yeah, I think it might even be more so like the reward system in place, because you can track measurable. My arms got bigger, my body fat is less, but you're still left at the subjective whim of a panel of old people looking at you in your underwear, like, respectfully. So it's more so that, like, and when dealing with clients who have specific body composition goals, I'm very much going to go to the data as the objective outcome. I'm not a judge. So we can make these remarkable improvements. It's just the actual reward is outside of your hands. Where in sports, it's binary for the most part, right? There's judges, there's subjective elements to sports. There's umpires and things like that sort of can skew the landscape a little bit. But I think the pursuits are still the same. Bodybuilding is still, like, by and large, an objective pursuit. It's just the reward system is gate kept subjectively, where the reward system in sports is gate kept objectively. So if you can make these improvements and your athlete can show up on the day, then you're proven to be useful. I think it might be more about accountability, now that I think about it. Like, I want to take a risk, and I think, relatively speaking, given the subjective nature of the reward system, how we decide, oh, you're first, you're second, you're third. Why? Because you look better, you're more symmetrical, you're more proportioned, whatever bodybuilding term, you're drier, you're wetter, or whatever the fuck. I don't know how it works. Um,
But the
I
amount of
just feel
tan and oil, they could be wetter.
right. Yeah. It's just, and again, like, I enjoy bodybuilding. I train probably more like a bodybuilder than an athlete at this stage of my life. But I just think it's about, you run a risk as a part of a machine that's trying to fly really close to the sun, and you need to be as equally prepared to take responsibility as take the credit. And I think that's where, bodybuilding coaches are very quick to jump to the forefront when they win their pro library card, or their athlete wins their pro library card. But anything shy of that, I want to see some fucking accountability. Like, if I'm one on one with an athlete, especially in an individual sport, I'm much closer tied to the success or failure of the outcome right? And more so probably the failure, right? If things go wrong, they're looking at me first. And so I think a lot of it has to do with the ability to take responsibility over the wantingness to take credit.
Mm. Do you get more people go through Prescript that are wanting to train athletes, or do you get people that are more body composition coaches going through the Prescript program?
Increasingly more the former, now that our level 3 program actually has pre-script coaches coming out to Florida and training for pro athletes. Although it's not exclusively that. I think what pro athletes offer you that the body composition world and the online coach don't get. There's a few things. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because our next cohort is coming up in January in Tampa. And I think it offers you, there's such a utility in being forced to run somebody else's program. So that's number one. Like most coaches are altogether unemployable. That's why they work for themselves, is because they're not a good team player. And the second you're in an athletic setting, you are part of a much larger machine that has a much more profound goal than just making enough money to work on your laptop from Bali or whatever the fuck the going trend is. Right. So I think that's part of it. And I think that's a benefit for coaches that don't want to get into sport. I think the best coaches I know, and I'm lucky to work with a handful of them at Prescript, they they understand the importance of like a team, and they understand the importance of culture. They understand the role that they play in their clients or their athletes' lives, and I think that's, you get a lot of exposure to that with the level 3 program, regardless of whether or not you're trying to get into sport. So we are seeing more people who want to get into sport, just as a byproduct of the trajectory of our curriculum, kind of coming to this precipice with you in a room with pro athletes. But the question I'm getting from the larger contingent of online coaches who see our education system and they go, well, I don't want to coach pro athletes. It's like, well, the pro athletes that you get to coach in person aren't there to teach you about sports. They're there to teach you about coaching.
Mm.
These coaches, and I say this often, like we'll have, it's very common in the off season for me to be coaching someone on the gym floor who was previously taking instruction from like Bill Belichick, right? Like, one of the greatest coaches across all sports of all time. And in that athlete's eyes, I fit into that bucket of coach, right? So it's like communicator, verbals and nonverbals. Like there's so much to more than just the reps and sets. So a lot of it is kind of creating awareness around what it actually means to be a coach. Because like, look, a lot of people are just personal fucking trainers on the internet. Like the word coach kind of like came out of the woodwork, and I feel partially responsible for that because we are a coaching certification, but we're a coaching certification because we focus on the intangibles that are made very tangible of communication, of teamwork, of humility. Like there's so much to actual coaching that's not just like, I'm going to call myself a coach because it's a fancier term than personal trainer, but I'm
I
really
think
just
the
going to be a
growth, sorry
shit
to cut
ton.
you off there, but I think the growth of the word coach is, I don't like it in a way, not because I think it's used because people don't want to call themselves personal trainers because they think of personal trainers be given a bad name as a rep counter.
Mm.
And it also, when you do that, it kind of shits on people like yourselves who are proper coaches because you're just a personal trainer with a new fancy name, like a physique coach. And I'm like, either put some pride on the name personal trainer and change what it means, or really go and become a coach. Don't just call
Mm.
yourself something different.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a game of 3 card Monty. It's like five. It's just a shell game, right? Like they're just trying to a rose by any other name, as our friend Shakespeare would say. But there's and we're trying to. I think there's room for proper coaching in the physique space, and I know there is because some of my closest friends run, there. And this isn't like a business thing, but they run successful businesses not because they're in fucking mentorship groups, not because they pay some fucking jerk off to tell them about how to DM advertise. They make a shit ton of money because they know how to coach on the internet. And you know how they know how to coach on the internet? Because they know how to coach in real life, right? Like you need to understand those intangibles, which you can only learn through experience. So, to circle back to your original question, I just think we're getting a cross section of the industry that goes out and seeks continuing education, and we're getting representative numbers of what's out there. We're starting to see more people from the coaching world enter in, because just as they may be better versed in the communication side, just being around athletes or in team settings of various capacities, they are maybe not as in depth with the biomechanics. So someone coming out of the bodybuilding world might know a lot of the biomechanics, but gets completely blindsided by a starting running back worth $100+ million being like, "Hey, go fuck yourself." And it's like, "Oh wow, okay, like I don't know how to handle this situation, but I know the line of pull of the medial head of the tricep or whatever." It's like, "Oh yeah, a lot of good that's gonna do you." He's Samoan, he'll eat you for lunch. But on the other side, we have strength coaches who come in who can handle that situation. People coming from the sport world who, communication isn't an issue, where they know how to match the energy and the distance and communicate with different athletes effectively. But hey, this guy's shoulder still hurts. Like, well, what have you done? It's like, I've just done bench press and back squat like we've always done. It's like, okay, all right, you got the talking piece down. Now we're going to teach you a little bit more about progression, regression, and models and things like that. So, we are seeing a pretty good cross section of both, and you can see where the holes are in both modes of working, and then what leaves our level 3 courses is a very complete product as a coach. So yeah, although it is training pro athletes, it's not about training pro athletes. It's about taking your job seriously. That's what it's all about. It's like, take your job seriously, take yourself seriously.
I couldn't agree with that more. And it's really interesting that despite a lot of what the people I'm working with, I'm not really, I've dealt with a few people that coach athletes, but I'm not an athlete certification. That's more your realm than it is mine. But I see that same level of cross-sectional area where coaches that come into SMU, we get kind of two buckets. We get the coach that sort of like really wants to help people, good communication skills, but has never really done the process themselves. And they maybe get a great rapport with a client, but their attention's like 3 months because they've never ever talked about training. And then we get the other side of the people that have just been like hardcore bodybuilders, everything about training, but they want to fire the clients when they don't stick to the plan in the first 2 weeks. And we got half the people need more communication skills, and then half the people that need to actually right, you're a coach. You should have a responsibility of understanding the things you're giving your clients. And that's why I think you guys are very unique, because while, yes, it's interesting to train for bodybuilding, someone's priorities are going to change. Everybody I know that was a bodybuilder in their 20s starts doing something like BJJ in their 30s. They all do it, right? So, and also, bodybuilding is great, but when I've lost the weight and I've achieved like dick skin lean levels of body fat, what's next? If you can program for performance, you can get people engaged with what's going to come in 6 months, 4 years, like you said before, and actually can help the body composition clients stay long enough to build muscle.
Yeah, the irony is I'm probably the only one that I could think of in their 30s who hasn't started like doing box jumps and shit. Even though like it's part of my job behind the camera, but like I still just want to look like Ronnie Coleman. Like that's still but I definitely from a work perspective understand the flip side to it. And it's, different strokes for different folks. I just think reframing. I did a podcast with Dan Garner about a year ago. Dan's brilliant on the nutrition side. He's brilliant, period. But he works on the nutrition side. He works in pro sports. He works with Sugar Sean O'Malley, and he talked about weight cuts. Sean said, every single weight cut with Dan has been successful, and it's like hilariously accurate, like steps on the scale, like right at the weight, and recomps very well, and obviously performs really well. He's in line, in my opinion, to be one of the best pound for pound fighters of all time. And I was talking to him about the process of weight loss. And he talked about it's really this addition by subtraction process of like removing detractors, removing stress. It's not about adding things. It's about like, very simplifying the process in a very sophisticated way. And I see, with most of the people that I interact with on the internet, would look at an athlete I would work with that plays in the NFL, probably my primary cohort right now, and be like, wow, I wish I'd look like that. And these people do not train for body. It's the same with CrossFit to a certain degree. It's like, a hypertrophy and body composition can be a byproduct, and I think can be an efficient byproduct of just of stripping away impediments to the system, right? Infractions to the system. So, when you focus solely on tension, and not to say it doesn't work, but I don't know if it's necessarily the most efficient way that it can work. Like, we'll take a kid fresh out of college, and my main focus, so we run a combine program where 30 of the top 300 college football players in the NCAA will come to us in January to February, and in late February they go to Indianapolis and they get tested on 9 events, including the horizontal jump, the vertical jump, the 40-yard dash. And the 40 is kind of like the piece de resistance. All I'm thinking about, especially for those athletes who need to run well, all I'm thinking about is an 8-week weight loss program. Because if I can get a kid down 20 pounds with the power that he's generated and accumulated over a 4-year college career at a top, like a tier 1, division 1 school, that kid will run 0.2, 0.4 seconds faster if I can get him down 20 pounds. So, yeah, but what do? It's like we simplify the process, right? There's no fasting windows. It's like, hey, we're going to get you eating for performance. So you show up every day and you burn the engine really hot and we put it back together for tomorrow. And, I watched one of our second year guys yesterday what's funny, we had a second year guy yesterday and a 9-year guy yesterday, both win player of the game for the respective teams on week 1 of the NFL season. And I just think it's a byproduct of trying to remove a lot of the noise. And both of them make continuous strides sort of year over year in the off season by doing less. And I think bodybuilding coaching is so inundated with the shiny red ball syndrome that it's about doing more. It's like, guys, the adaptations you're making are relatively simple if you get all the noise out of the way. So I think part of the process is simplifying the inputs and outputs, and really like not looking at it so far. It's almost like, but when I talk to clinicians about pain, there's a great quote by a guy named Perry Mickelson. He says, he who searches for the site of pain is lost, or something. It's like, if you're like, oh, your elbow hurts, let's fix your elbow. It's like, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Oh, like your body composition, let's like dig you into a massive deficit and do 3 hours of cardio. Or like, oh, your arms are bigger, let's do the 85 different tricep extensions that'll target these different heads. It's like, you have to be able to zoom in and out. And I think a lot of people get stuck in a rigid perspective that just makes them inefficient at getting the results they want. And sports force you, with the performance as the outcome, to be very adaptable. Sorry, we trailed off there for a second, but
no, I like the trail, but I completely agree with it. It's why, I often speak to the coaches that come through our program. It's like everybody, you go, oh, calories in versus calories out, and I move more. This is really easy, and you think you're a genius, and then all of a sudden you're introduced to like functional anatomy and go, oh my God, I'm so stupid. And then you get a grasp of that, and then someone goes, yeah, but there's this fascia thing, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm an idiot. Then you learn that, and then it's like, so let's tell you how thyroid works. And my job is like, you go through this level of complexity, and then you come back and realize how simple it is again. Like how most of the shit can be solved by the 1 or 2 big things, but you still need the appreciation of that to know which 1 or 2 big things are important. And I see a lot of coaches getting so caught up in this, they forget about this thing between your ears. Like you mentioned about tension earlier on, and like how that might not be the most effective thing. Maybe if the goal was to put as much tension and grow that quad as much as possible. But if the person has no external performance, they don't enjoy coming to the gym, and they don't want to stick it out for a year, that's fantastic. 2 weeks of a lot of tension isn't going to do much to your physique over the long haul. And I think there's this great balancing act between, I teach our students to work with like Susan from Slough. We're not training NFL athletes here, but Susan from Slough, by 4 weeks, she's bored of the diet, and you can feed her up because you're training her harder and increasing her training stimulus over time. And you can have that fine balance between, yes, we have got the goal of the bodybuilder, which is look better in your bikini for you, but also enough of the goal of the athlete where if you don't hit a PB this week, you're going to cry into a box of donuts. That, finding where that is on the spectrum, and that's where I think learning a bit of periodization or programming for an athlete becomes really, really important for the body composition world, because we're not training bodybuilders. We're training people that want to look better, but also have an emotional connection to the gym, to their food, to their family, to their social life, to their work. And you need something that is that balance between outcome and enjoyment.
Yeah, there's again the focal point on the tension thing is it's so hilariously myopic for so many reasons that even I think to the detriment of the primary goal itself. Um, like the idea that muscles are just dumb motor output bags of meat. It is like it's almost borderlines on neglect. Like we don't have some top-down governing system like the nervous system that's going to really dictate our progress. There's there's so many kind of like you alluded to. There's so many rabbit holes of fascia, to thyroid function, where it's like if you're a coach and you're listening to this and you are to if you want to take like a hero dose of perspective, start learning about the nervous system. Like I beg you, I plead of you, because once you start diving into the nervous system outside of the little bit that it intersects with hypertrophy signaling and tension and muscular contraction and uh, sarcoplasmic reticulums and all of that stuff that only has to do with the one thing you care about, which is contracting muscle. And you start to learn, if you start to learn of like the neuroendocrine response to different types of training. So I start there. Then you can easily justify like a med ball throw with Susan from Slough, right? Or is that a place? Did I get that right?
It's yeah. Have you ever seen The Office? Not the American one, the good one.
I have not. The Ricky Gervais
that,
one.
that,
I am partial to Ricky Gervais.
Don't go there. It's a horrendous place. Just stay in London.
Okay.
Sorry for anyone from Slough.
Yeah, but it's like there's. I think I think of the parable of the blind elephant, which is like a video that I'm familiar with. It. There's five blind men standing around an elephant trying to describe what it is they're seeing, and someone is, I don't know, at the trunk, and they're like, oh, it's some sort of hose apparatus, and someone is at a leg, and they're like, oh, it's some sort of like tree trunk or something, and another blind man's at the ear, and it's like, no, it's like this big leaf thing. And you can't fault either of the blind men for not being able to figure out that, given whatever appendage is in their hand, that it's an elephant. But sitting back as someone who's had some sight over the entire thing, you go, okay, I see where they're going wrong. Watching the hypertrophy world, to look at growing muscle is like watching, someone at an elephant's trunk go, oh, it's a fire hose. And you're like, okay, but when you take a step back and you look at whether, and this is where I think training in person, now almost all of the training I do is in person, because I'm holding myself accountable to the principles that I teach every single day, and I think that's big. It's about taking responsibility, not taking credit. So I can sit there and teach 200 plus hours of curriculum from 3 different books that I've written, but I am never. You're only overthinking if you're underdoing, right? So if I spend the majority of my time coaching in person, which I do, then I'm met with different problems to solve. And through the entirety of my career, I've got to see the leg and the ear and the trunk and the tail and can tell you with a little bit more certainty just what this thing is when we put it all together. Like there is a giant, no pun intended in parables and analogies, but there is a giant elephant in the room that everyone's missing because we're too focused on the fucking hose that's actually in the trunk, right? So I just think there's getting that exposure to different problems to solve and realizing that I think he was actually British, gentleman who said his last name was George Box. All models are wrong, just some are useful. And you have to have a model that allows for an inherent flexibility and expansion. And when you start going solely down the tension route, you realize that you might be missing something, even in the pursuit of like, oh, we think and we're sold and we believe this idea that if all we focus on is just pure tension, stable output of a muscle, that it will grow more than in other scenarios, and that's just not the case. There's so much more going on, and when I hear that, I'm like, this is someone calling the trunk of an elephant a hose without realizing that it's an elephant.
So how does a coach begin, if they're overwhelmed by all this stuff, how does a coach begin to build their model? How do they begin to take a step back and see the elephant for what it is?
Mm. Yeah, look, evolution is driven by two major processes: environment and failure. That's really like, if you look Darwinistically at evolution, those are the two major processes that are going to drive evolution: a change in the environment and some sort of error. That's what evolution responds to. And I think that's as true as the finch in the Galapagos as it is to humans within their own lifespan. So, like, you need to go out and, with whatever knowledge you have, you need to go out and fail as aggressively and as confidently as humanly possible, knowing that on the other side of that, you will realize where your error was, and you need to change your environment, right? I think that's, we came off the hop about traveling and we talk a bit about kind of going all over. That's by design at this point. It was by necessity of being a homeless vagabond who just didn't have no choice but to trade showers for seminars. I'm not at that point anymore, thankfully, but I still elect to travel to work with different athletes in the pursuit of a change of environment and error, because that's what drives evolution. You just have to, again, like, the humility part of it is, it's not humility, it's not anything to hang your hat on. It's part of learning, or it's part of, like, it's quite literally, like, I mean, should say it in like David Attenborough's voice, but like, it's quite literally the driving force of evolution across time, across species. But I think within a single person's lifespan, the more you can subject yourself to those two experiences, the more you're going to learn. So it's like, you don't know anything, get into a room where someone trusts you enough, where you can fail without someone dying, and do that as quickly and as confidently as possible, and get back up as quickly as confidently as possible, knowing full well that that's kind of the goal. And then the goal is to just suck a little bit less over time.
Mm.
And the second, like, and this is true of me, like, I've taken on athletes in different sports, and these opportunities have come by just accruing a ton of error in a ton of different environments. But I still am looking for the next environment that can offer me a novel error to evolve. So I just think there's this, perfection is the enemy of progress. And I think that's really a stunting mindset of, or like, perfection is a stunting mindset to your own personal evolution, especially as a coach, especially when it comes to your skill set. So, like, if you accept it as a precondition, like, you are not sacrificing your career if you make a mistake. That is actually a prerequisite to having a robust career that is worth sort of hanging your hat on when this is all said and done. So I think just it's a little bit psychological in the sense that you need to adopt a frame shift that error and environment are prerequisites to success, not inevitabilities of failure. And when you do that, you're like, okay, where can I fuck up next?
To emphasize how much you believe in this, before we came on the air, I told you about my recent circumstances, about my separation, and your response was, congratulations, by the change of environment. And you proved your point, but do you think that coaches are less inclined to do this than ever before? Because I see this. I sometimes go into Facebook groups trying to give advice. It's just sort of a marketing strategy. And I see more people in general, even in the fitness space, in general, put anonymous handles for things that, like, why are you anonymous? I'll give you a non-fitness example. Hong Kong expat group. Someone's put in there going, where can I go for dinner in Kowloon? Any recommendations? And there were anonymous posts. I'm like, why are you being anonymous about asking where to eat? That people are almost so scared of that judgment now. Have you seen that change since, because we're pretty much the same age, since when we started in this industry? It was, we traveled, we got out there, we worked the hours on the gym floor, we made a ton of mistakes, we found people and learned to be a coach. Whereas now I see a lot more people being scared of that being wrong or failure.
Right. So people are a lot less inclined to talk shit in real life, and look, there's a deep rooted point to this, and so stay with me. When you and I were cutting our teeth, we did it in an arena where if someone wanted to contest what I was saying, they would have to have a certain level of confidence to walk up to, and this isn't like a size thing or an intimidation thing. It's really, I think, more of a mutual respect thing, and it's sort of communal and understood between two people in real life. And don't get me wrong, like I grew up in a place where like you become very capable, or at least exposed to conflict in real life. So I think there is a fear now. You struck on something deep, in my opinion, because the quickest way to the top now is the floating head video that's just chopping someone up. But it's like, hey, look, man, I'm traveling. I like to travel, even if I don't have to travel for work. I'll travel to get in someone's face and be like, hey, it's not the comment section anymore. It's a back alley behind your gym, and you're headed to your vehicle. Do you want to make amends? Or but no, I honestly, I think that because social media is such a tool, it's such a powerful tool, and we're being classically, and maybe not you or I, but I think the industry and the emerging coaches are being classically conditioned um, to be afraid of being wrong. And it's like, well, go back to the evolution and environment thing, right? They are stuck in this environment digitally where they don't like to break out of. They coach there, they work there, they interact there, they communicate there. It's their community.
I feel like they need
So
to be the expert, right? You once said to me that if you want to work in New York, you got to live in New York, and if you want to work on the internet, you got to live in the internet. So rightly so, but we now have people living in the internet, not experiencing real people, and feeling like they need to live up to these other people and stand out. So now they have to be the expert. So if anyone challenges that, it's more of an ego hit than 10 years ago when I was in rooms being challenged all the time. So even if I had to portray the expert, I had this underbelly of criticism and mistakes and graft, which I think a lot of people don't have as much anymore.
I think, yeah, again, I think you've struck on something. Like you, you have to learn how to. I feel like when I talk to coaches about the digital space, I feel like it's my father talking to me after getting bullied in like the third grade. Like, hey, it's gonna keep happening unless you fucking stand up for yourself. But it goes further than just commenting back. Like I had I had someone with a very large following make a very disparaging post about me specifically. Like put up a clip of me from a podcast 2 years ago, and I'm like it was like, oh, I thought he like basically said I was wrong and he was defending his position. Now, mind you, I did not call him out by name and refuse to do that now. And at the end of and this is for me, and I'm not advocating for this. It's a byproduct of my environment, and I hope it never comes to this. But if someone were to disrespect me like that in real life, I would have no qualms with feeding them their front row of teeth. Right? I would have there would be zero hesitation of like, but again, and this is where I think, we have to layer on context. I don't want to come off as this just sort of irrational, violent person, because I think the person in question here who was making this piece of content that reached like literally millions of people, I I don't think he would conduct himself in that way on the internet. I think he's captured by the platform, and I think a large part of his behavior, or a large driver of his behavior, is subconsciously driven by the static nature of the environment in which he lives in on the internet.
That's what
But
I was going to add. That's what I was going to add there as well. Like how much this is a dopamine thing, because I see like in the same way that if you start watching pornography, you need more pornography. You start taking coke, you need more coke. I feel that often these reaction videos started with a good place. People with large followings maybe using things to get a bit of a kickback and giving bad information, so people reacted. Now, because we see it go viral, we see two things. We see those people running out of information, and now they start criticizing people for doing a bicep curl slightly wrong. I'm like, no one. Like Susan there was like, I was losing weight and then I positioned my elbow wrong on the bicep curl and I gained 20 kilos. Like that has never happened. And we're now slamming coaches who are now terrified to post, or we're seeing newer coaches think that's the way to get ahead when they don't have enough under the hood to really have a good argument on their point.
One, being contrarian is not being original, right? So, I made a comparison on a podcast I was on recently to these people, and because I like other things. Like, I enjoy art. Like, I have commissioned pieces of art, and they're nothing special. Like, I'm looking at some tattoo flash that's original from one of my artists or one of my tattoo artists that he made for me. It's behind my screen. I'm looking at a black and white photo that my friend took in Kiev a few years ago during the war. I'm looking at two commissioned photos or sketches of Oppenheimer and Primo Levi. I like other things, right? Like, I think we could talk about the yes, fucking right. But like, we can talk about the superficial conduct, and we can talk about, the comings and goings of content styles and trends. But like, there is still a person behind there that needs to get worked on. And I know this because, as mentioned earlier, I I was a person who had a certain affinity for violence, and I'm less of that person now because I've like done the work. Like, if when I travel, I will go, and I'm not like like an art nerd. I'm not like, again, I'm looking at like an eagle and like a skull that a tattoo artist made. I just like other stuff because you need something to ground you in a real reward system, right? Like, you need something, and this is going to be my major takeaway point. You have to understand that psychologically reactions are weak. So when I was, and I'll speak solely to myself, when I was a particularly violent person, I thought I thought I was very capable. I worked in the bar scene. I would go out specifically looking for particular types of confrontation. But what I realized is that I was actually really weak because I wasn't in control. Because I was looking for a reactive situation where I could feel some sort of control. But if a reaction is not a reaction is weak. So every reaction video I see, I think that person is mentally weak. You saw something and you didn't think and you reacted. You see something, if you're strong mentally, you think and then you act. Reactions are devoid of thinking. They are reactions, right? Like, if we think of, again, the nervous system, if we look at like reflexes, like, there's no thought process. It skips central command, right? It's a closed loop circuit at the level of the local spinal nerve. So it's like, I just see people who go down that road, and my initial thought is, one, you don't have a reward system grounded in reality. I went to sleep last night, and before I went to bed, I really like this song called "Joy of My Life" by Chris Stapleton. I've been listening to it recently, and I played guitar for the last 20 something years. So I'm like, all right, I want to learn this one riff. Picked up my guitar for 20 minutes. I woke up this morning prior to coming on here, played it again, and I literally said out loud, isn't it funny how you learn in your sleep? And I like kind of figured out this little riff in the matter of, I don't know, 40 minutes. And then I came on here, and when I'm done with this, I'll probably go back to that. And then I'm gonna, it's just like, so you have to find reward systems that are in your control. And then you have to realize that reactions are weak. They're an indulgence, right? Like, everyone loves to talk about like discipline and all this bullshit. And people will talk about discipline versus motivation. No one talks about inspiration, which is wild to me. Like, if you're truly inspired by something, the no amount of discipline or motivation in the world really matters anymore. So, like, go fucking read a book or something, or go to a museum, or go get inspired. Go spend money on getting inspired. When you figure out what true inspiration is, discipline and motivation are fucking, they're out in the ether, like, they're useless, or relatively speaking. But like, you have to think about, look, I need a reward system that's under my control, because there are people who are just, whether it is in a microcosm, the reward system caused by the shit posting, floating head critique of someone else's opinion, whether that's the reward system, or whether it's the reward system of just ebbing and flowing with how social media has taught you to behave. Either way, at both levels, you're not in control, right? And if you want to be someone who's like, can look themselves in the mirror, than having an ounce of control of how you act. Because like, look, I've taken enough drugs in my life to tell you that this is all a simulation, like without a doubt. Like I got a nuclear dose sitting next to my fridge that'll change anyone's mind. But it's like I'm certain as is all of this is, and free will is not really a thing. I operate or I act in the world as if I have control over one thing, and that's the way I act, not the way I react, the way I act.
Mm-hmm.
And reaction or action is a process that involves thinking, and we don't do that anymore. We don't think. I had to explain to someone what, like, someone had pointed a question to me weeks ago about like how does your brain work? I was like, okay, so like let me try. And he was a young kid, and he was like very much the quintessentially like broccoli headed. He was a meme. He was literally a meme in real life talking to me, and I was like, he's like, wow, like how does your brain work? I was like, okay, let me try and explain this to you in a way you'll understand. My brain is like Instagram. Okay, you with me? Or like TikTok. I don't have TikTok, but I'm really trying to reach him. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, so what I do all the time is I like post stuff in my brain and then I predict what the comments are going to be. And then based off of that, I either do or say the thing or not. And he's like, oh, like that's kind of what thinking is. And he goes, oh, I get it now. I'm like, did I just have to describe thinking to a child? Like, what the fuck? Like, it actually kind of like clicked. Because I'll see people do like post stuff and then like take it down. I'm like, oh, really? You didn't think that was a bad idea to post that? You fucking idiot. Post it in your brain first and predict what the comments are going to be. And that's we're like halfway to thinking there. It's just baffling. It's baffling to me.
But do you think that, because you mentioned obviously playing guitar, do you think life has become so comfortable? Like you mentioned before, like you do it because you look at the fitness industry earlier as this relatively easy in comparison to other jobs. Yet, could you imagine if you went on Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, depending on where you are in the world, and you pitched the idea of a float tank in 2001? Like you sit in a big bathtub with the lights off for an hour, and we're going to charge you £100 for the privilege. Like people are seeking out artificial discomfort that doesn't really get them anywhere. But like you said to me a while back that the best advice when I was asking, like, I'm fresh out of a company, I need to build my own business. You meant do something, whether that's BJJ, learning guitar, anything that you can have this delayed gratification over time. Do we feel we're lacking this and this? We'll go to the biohacking ice bath instead. You can't get better at ice baths.
Mm. It's tough. I think it's deeper than that. I think it's what people are lacking is the community aspect. I think CrossFit really illuminated that, right? There's something to be said about communal suffering. And don't take my word for it. Literally read any religious text of all time. So I think it's that. I think people are like really lonely, and that's okay. And temperamentally, depending on whether you're introverted or extroverted, and I'm not wouldn't be the authority to say how to establish that, but like I think, and I realize this in the critique of my life from others, going like, oh, I couldn't do what you do, and it's like, yeah, fair play. Like I see where sitting in an airplane for 10 plus hours multiple times a week is not for everyone. But I think it comes down to every time I see or hear someone look at my lifestyle, which in part can be lonely at times, but like there's a difference between being alone and lonely. Like I'm alone fairly often, like traveling or working or hotels. Like I spent a couple of weeks on the road, but I'm not lonely. And that's a temperamental proclivity from individual to individual. So I think one of the things that's driving these behaviors, I think the real dopamine hit here, is the community that's built around the suffering, which is like probably I think that is the root of a lot of these behaviors rather than the internal suffering itself, because you see how successful, and it's a weird way to put religion. I don't want to be disparaging toward religions, but like religions are that premise of a community around communal suffering. And I think that's what you're seeing. So when I see an ice bath video for the 100th time, and I see, someone posting their carnivore steak 12th ribeye of the day, when I see it's community, and on the flip side of that, when I see, it's so easy to take a look at people who are really successful because we shine such a bright light on them. When I see like a Kayla It Signs, and we can critique the app all we want, but the older I get, the more I just default to like, hey, like, are you doing harm? No. Are people happy with your product? Well, that's what the best part about free market capitalism is. If your product was actually shit, you wouldn't make any money, right? It's not like Kayla It Signs is like working with the CCP and Xi Jinping is forcing everyone to do her app or whatever the fuck, right? Like, I don't know her from a hole in the wall, but I'm familiar with the valuation of her company, and that's based off of something. And it's based off of something that fundamentally, one to, trainers and coaches with 30 to 50 clients online or people who aspire to be that don't fucking understand why someone like It Signs is making money hand over fist and why they're just a sad person angry in the room. It's because they've understood what actually matters. The suffering is the work ethic. And sometimes, guess what? Guess what they're optimizing for? They're optimizing for suffering. Why would anyone in their right mind program burpees for another human being unless you could look at the other person from Slough and be like, wow, those burpees were really hard. Want to be friends, right? Like it's optimization has gone so far to like it's optimization is a word, right? When you say optimization in the bodybuilding Instagram space that you and I kind of dip our toe and we peek in every now and then, people know exactly what you mean. But it's like everything is relative. What are you optimizing for? A lot of the decisions I make when I have 20, 30 kids between the age of 20 and 30 that are worth, I don't know, I did the math on our off-season NFL program, and there's it's funny because you compare numbers between different sports. Our off-season NFL program, if I add up all the money in the contracts that's on the gym floor at one time, it works out to be around $1 billion. But I'll be in the room with 5 baseball players that combined salary is $1.5 billion, right? So it's like, when I'm dealing with a room like that, and I'm thinking from like our lens of optimal, I need to recalibrate what I'm optimizing for. A lot of times I have to optimize for enjoyment or engagement. That's going to be my biggest thing. Otherwise, they're just going to go down the street to some other guy that lets them play whatever playlist they want or does the exercises that they like. When I see, and I again, I don't, It Signs is just one that jumps off the page because I know I've heard some of the financials, but like, one of my close friends, and I will defend him to the death, not that he needs my defense, was the original founder of F45. It's like the man created the fastest growing fitness brand of all time. Tell him he's wrong. Like, tell him he's wrong. But what did he optimize for? He optimized for communal suffering. Right? I did an F45 class with Rob in Double Bay, Australia, and I could tell you, I was suffering for like many days after. Was it specific? No, but most people may not even have goals. Most people's goals are probably to, gain some sort of sense of community, right? So by that, he has optimized for it tremendously, and the free market has has rewarded him for what he has optimized for. I just think people are optimizing for the wrong thing. So it's like, just like it's so exhausting to watch people again just to like play around with the trunk and to start wondering why everyone doesn't love the garden hose. It's like it's because it's not a fucking hose, you idiot. Like, oh, anyway, sorry, ran over, but it's like, we're so quick to call people dumb and smart, and two people are, the people that we call dumb are sitting there in their money vaults surrounded by jewels and what, like Scrooge McDuck. And do you think they give a fuck? You think the millions of people that they help and continually give them money give a fuck? No. You're just an angry, sad little person who like maybe needs to go take a walk and like go to a museum or, like, fuck, it's not that hard.
It's the same thing in the dieting world, right? One of the things I always talk about because there's this big, when I look at coaches now, there's this big trend for recipes. People projecting their insecurities around food and their bad relation to food onto other people and going, I need 500 high protein, low carb burrito recipes. I'm like, is it quicker than a steak? No. Then it's probably too complicated for most people. Like, don't overcomplicate this shit. And I always say to my students, why has Weight Watchers, Slimming World, Herbalife, Atkins all got more results than you? Because They are simple. Now, you might dislike or like certain parts of the diet, but in your process of being optimal, you may become inaccessible. And even if have you ever heard the Peter Hitchens quote, "You choose your regrets"? It's not, you don't get to you don't get the choice to not have any regrets. It's you choose which ones you have, because everything has a trade-off. So if we're optimizing for tension and stability and we're locking our shoulders back and down on the bench press to be the world's strongest bench presser, well, that's great. But I've heard you speak about the serratus anterior a lot to go, that's great for this, and you're optimizing for this, was going the opposite of optimization for movement and freedom and things like this. If we look at trying to look at someone's limb lengths and anthropometrics and go, you've got a deep hip socket, a long femur, and this is a better exercise for your quad growth, that's great. But now this training becomes really isolated and really lonely very quickly, because you can't train with anyone because no one has your exact structure. At some point, there's got to be this wiggle room. Otherwise, you either become a very, very Dorian Yates style character, and if you haven't got the genetics in him, it becomes pretty fucking boring. Or there's no longevity to what you're doing in the first place.
The optimal crowd has science the human out of coaching.
Yes.
Which you can't do. You can't do that. And it's only people who don't actually coach people in real life who realize the house of cards that the optimal crowd is building. Like I know some trainers who, and I think we all do. I think we all know, we could all go back to the gym that we started training at. And there's the guy there who's been there since it opened, who maybe doesn't have any sort of formal education, whose clients love him, whose clients have been with him for as long as you've been alive. And, he makes a modest income and he's optimized for his own fulfillment. And, you could have the audacity to look at the way he trains people and say this, that, and third, where most people, what is the attrition rate in the industry right now? We're getting into personal training. Like I know strippers with more longevity than trainers. Right? But it's just have a dose of perspective. And also mind your fucking business is also maybe another thing. Water your own grass, so to speak. It's just amazing to me how people are so quick to make enemies to be right. A friend of mine, Tim Riley, phrases it, I'd rather get it right than be right. And it's yeah, that is kind of, because we are, I had there's a great quote by Tony Doherty. And again, I speak a lot in quotes. It's kind of if someone who's come before you has said it better, so steal from them and end strong. That's actually a quote itself. That's a quote from American History X for those of you following at home. And Tony said, regardless of the gym or bodybuilding, of all the businesses I'm in the people business first and foremost. And if anyone's ever met Tony Doherty, he's lovely. And he amplifies that, and he was emblematic of that. And you go to any of Doherty's gyms, they're up there with the best gyms in the world. And the reason they're the best is not necessarily the equipment, which is incredible, or the environment. Some of the Dohertys in Melbourne are just all-time locations. They're great feel and vibe, but it's great because when you walk in the door, Tony's there. Or if Tony's not there, someone who's lives up to Tony's standard of personal communication is there. Oh yeah, good, great. I go there once a year, maybe on a biannual basis, or twice a year, every 2 years. And every time I go there, it's like an episode of Cheers, right? Sometimes it's just nice to go somewhere where someone knows your name. So no, that's another TV show reference. I've said 4 original things, and I've just been spouting out different references and analogies and quotes. But there's it's just we've been attempting to lose that, right? For every research article, it's okay. And look, I get it. Sports science is a big part of my job. I have to report to team owners and general managers with a dossier of different metrics on teams that are worth a lot more than what clients are paying coaches online. I can assure you that. And, but at a certain point, when I'm debriefing with an organization, I have to be yes, but we're dealing with 20 to 30-year-olds that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So here's what the best option is right now. And it may not be the best in a vacuum because we don't live and work in a vacuum.
I couldn't agree more with that. When you said that, I 2 things popped in my head about how much that sort of kind of community element, but certainly the people skills of personal training is so much more important than anyone gives it credit for. I caught up with an old client of mine before I moved to Hong Kong on Thursday, and she said one of the things that she really loved about my approach and the other trainers she'd had is that I introduced her to everyone in the gym. There was a little bit of banter, a little bit of competition. It wasn't just, let's focus on this. In the set starts, we're all in. But the other thing that sprung to mind was James Campion, so the owner of Hit PT that has done your courses. And I remember when James went on holiday, and don't get me wrong, the vibe of the gym was still great. We had, me and Josh and a few other guys sort of like manning the fort and making sure everything was good. But there was something changed when James and Karen got back from holiday and they walked back into the gym, and the whole energy picks up. They hadn't done anything. They hadn't coached anyone. They hadn't corrected a split squat foot to make it more optimal. It's the vibe and the presence that people want to come there because they see those people. And if we can get people training, that's 90% of optimization is doing the thing rather than worrying about this top 10%, which, yes, could make it 10% better, but is useless if people aren't there to begin with. And I think the evidence-based thing is another bit of I don't want to say a cop-out, but I always say, great, sports science is a big part of your job. It's a big part of my job. And we need to use this to create the foundations of our thinking. But it still tells us the middle of the bell curve. So we can find many studies that say squats are best for quad growth. But you've got 19-foot Shaquille O'Neal over here that wants to kind of grow a little bit bigger quads. You're like, yeah, you fall out of this bell curve. It's taking that. The evidence-based crowd is grabbing the leg of the elephant, and the optimal crowd is grabbing the trunk, and it's being able to go, right, evidence says this, but we need to go center left because this guy is over here. Do you think that realm has gone a bit too far in terms of the evidence-based stuff?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's trained Shaquille O'Neal, I can tell you the elephant's leg is pretty close.
Top moment.
Yeah. So you saw, especially got a lot of scar tissue. What they used to do to manage pain in the NBA is pretty wild. Sure, and I mean, I'll add a layer to that. Evidence-based is a milk stool, right? I mean, a milk stool has three legs to it. And I think the leg that we're missing, the leg that allows you to realize what the trunk is the trunk and the leg is the leg and the tail is the tail and the ear is the ear, is experience. And this is where, the low barrier of entry. And Pat Davidson has this concept around the industry that I think it's a revolutionary concept, and it's something that what we're trying to do with L3 is large in part, or it captures Pat's idea. And the idea is that we're essentially a physical trade, right? And it's no different than, I don't know, my sister has been in school for 20 years. She's a physician, and she's done all these different residencies for all these different subdisciplines. She was just on an anesthetics ward. She's done neurosurge. She's done hella medicine, up in a helicopter, fucking saving people in Australia. And when she does that, she needs to accumulate a certain number of hours. And the hours that's the experience. That's where you really learn how to practice medicine, because you can't practice surgery on the internet. You can't practice anesthetics on the internet, right? And there are components of medicine that you can practice over the internet. We sort of saw that as an emerging, efficient means of diagnosis, throughout COVID. But I think there's a point where you only see the elephant for the elephant if you've been in the fucking zoo. You know what I mean? And so you need to put the reps in. An experienced online coach is not an experienced coach, in my opinion. You need to be able to it's almost as if you need to see you need to hear the notes in between, right? I can read a guitar tab online, which I've been doing for the last hour before this or whatever it was, but it's not going to put the notes in my head. And I've been playing long enough that I can see something like, hey, I know what a G sounds like, I know what a C sounds like, but only because I picked the guitar up for 20 years and played these notes. So it's when you look at the evidence-based crowd and you can kind of compare them to the optimization crowd, I think in some ways they're very similar, and they are looking at one thing in isolation. Both of these crowds lack experience, and experience teaches you discernment. which I think if there was a human virtue that I could wake up tomorrow and everyone in the world be a little bit more endowed with, I think discernment would probably be discernment or awareness would probably be at top of that list. It's the experience that allows you to discern whether or not we need to do something with the leg or something with the trunk, right? So to get it back to the milk stool analogy, evidence based is technically, by definition, it is the compilation of best practices and research on a particular topic that you're referring to. It is your professional experience, right? And I think that's a big one that lacks because a lot of people don't acquire real experience; they just work on the internet. And it's also the values of the person that you're working with, right? So if you were to look up what is evidence-based practice, it's those three things, right? It's the best practice in literature mixed with your experience, mixed with your client and patient values. Now, these are all very fluid mediums. Research changes, seemingly by the day. And there's things that are good, that were bad, things that are in vogue, that aren't in vogue. There's shady practices in research, as we've seen in years past. But personal experience is also a variable. The longer I've been doing something and the more consequences I've paid for the mistakes that I've made, and I make less and less mistakes as a byproduct, the more confident I'm in my body of work and how I get to a particular result. Which means if I have a research article that comes out that's antithetical to the corpus of research on that particular topic, I'm not going to be swayed by one paper that comes out that says, uh, blue plus fish equals yellow. It's like if I think blue plus fish has always equaled green, I'm not going to all of a sudden be like, oh, I was wrong. Did I get results over time? Yes, I'm going to wait for this thing to catch up to me. The problem is my personal experience, or the problem with the industry is people haven't accrued enough personal experience to stand steadfastly in the results that they've gotten because they haven't gotten that many results. And sometimes they don't get the result that they need because they're too busy flowing with the trade winds of research or the vanity of the conversation du jour, and they've never actually experienced failure because every time that they fail at the hands of just citing research, they go, well, we were operating off that. We say, why don't you take some fucking responsibility? Why don't you plant a flag somewhere in a thought and ride that out to the bitter end rather than getting to the other side of like, oh wow, that didn't really work. Well, I was going off of douchebag et al. And the paper from 2019. It's like, okay, why don't you be that douchebag, right? And then you can actually learn because all you're learning to do is then recapitulate your next excuse to the next author, right? So you have to look at that milk stool and keep it balanced of like personal experience, best practice research, and then I think most importantly, being in the people business, the values of the person, right? You talked about earlier, right? I've seen people make incredible body composition progress playing pickleball. Better than I've seen people just pick up pickleball and with doing nothing else other than just being addicted by ping pong where you stand on the table. And I've seen them do more in 6 months than with multiple years of training one-on-one with the trainer prior to
that. I had never even heard of pickleball until like the last year. It seems like Chris Williamson mentioned pickleball. Not everyone is talking about pickleball. I didn't even know it was a thing. I had to look it up a couple of months ago what it was. But I think you're right. I think this is what comes down to that you said earlier on about having a model. I think I certainly got caught up in this early on in my career when I was just trying to learn everything. I was like, well, we'll use, because a lot of these people stop doing their education stuff. But if I did a bit of Poliquin stuff and then I'll jump onto some of the things that you do or Cassim does or insert things here. And I become this great collector of information and no application. And it was only when I started looking at coaches coming in younger than me in the industry, not knowing as much as me in the industry, but getting more results than me. I was like, what's going on here? Like, I could school this guy in a debate about how this shit works, yet he's doing it better. It's because he's gone, I'm here, I'm going to learn one thing, I'm going to do it really well, and when I've got really good at that, I'm going to move on to the next thing. And that's when I went, well, where do I work? I work at UP. Cool, what are they really good at? Full body GBC programming and low carb dieting. So what am I going to become? The expert at low carb dieting and full body GBC. I probably know those two avenues probably better than most people not called Charles Poliquin. And then I go, right, now I'll add another tool to my toolbox and another tool to my toolbox. And that's the thing. I'm like, if you're at the whim of research, you never refine anything because it's like as soon as something new comes in and goes, oh, well, I'm going to get rid of that. Whereas if I do few years of becoming really good, refine it, get better at it, and then I go, right, where am I short? Oh, there's some good things about carbs. Let's do that. Let's learn about that. But trying to do it all at once, you just end up getting lost.
This is where I like Pat's analogy about being a trade, because the tool in the toolbox thing is it's a I'm going to have a disproportionate number of conversations with people surrounding education because that's the business that I'm in. But like, if you've ever been a contractor, like if you've ever worked on construction sites, like, I don't know, man, I worked on some sites with some fucking Portuguese dudes and they had like 3 tools. They could build an entire house with like a fucking framing nailer, a hammer, and like a handsaw. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think of, and this is where like inspiration comes from. This is where having some like lateral thinking and critical thinking capabilities. Like, I don't know, I was in, I think it's called D'Orsay. I'm saying it wrong, but a French accent on it. It's an old train station. They've converted into an art museum on the other side of the river in Paris, the opposite to the Louvre. It's almost right across. And you're looking at this building. You're like looking at some of these pieces. Like you're looking at like a Bernini statue, and you're like, he doesn't need a lot of tools. He doesn't. He's a craftsman. Bernini did not have a lot of tools. He predates Michelangelo. Like Michelangelo and Da Vinci will both say that Bernini is the best sculptor of all time. Like if you're like go to Florence and see the Rape of Persephone carved out of fucking like 12 feet of marble, and you're like, oh, maybe you don't need more tools. Maybe you need to like refine the use of the tools that you have. And here's the thing, when you see that the tool that everyone has is an ability to communicate with someone, and when you see the coaches who are just so fucking good at communicating that it doesn't even matter what tool, that's Bernini. Bernini shows up with a chisel and a block of marble and goes, "What do you want? All right, I'll make this thing fucking dance." And it's like he does it with one tool. So again, I think a large in part it's an abdication of responsibility because people are like, well, it wasn't my fault the DeWalt ran out of batteries, so I had to go get a Makita. For those of you who don't know how to change a tire, those are manufacturers of power tools. But it's like, okay, if you break it down to the brass tacks, I know coaches who couldn't tell you, who couldn't name all of the superficial muscles in the body, right? Couldn't tell you that there's two, there's 2 heads to a bicep femoris. Couldn't tell you, but they're getting results. But it just goes to show you, like, there's something to be learned there, right? Like, there's something to be learned from those people, and not to be disparaged. Like, there's something to be celebrated. Like, someone will look at that, like, that guy doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. It's like, oh wow, way to build yourself up, man. Good job. Or rather than looking at the guy, be like, this guy's built, I don't know, 7, 8 feet. I'm still thinking about people specifically who built like 8-figure businesses off of being great at communicating. Look at Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins is and potentially a genius, but also maybe an insane person. But like his tool is that he seems to be able to wield that human relationship better than anyone else. And it's like, you tell Tony Robbins, I wouldn't because he's fucking huge. And he's also not wrong because he has, I don't know, probably a 9-figure business. And, someone's charging $300 a month for coaching. He charges $10,000 a ticket for stadiums of 35,000 people. So like, let the free market decide who's wrong. But you can look at that and be like, this guy's full of shit. This guy's a charlatan, blah, 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 blah. It's like, or maybe you're just really bad at communicating. Like maybe you're embarrassingly bad at communicating from the depths of your basement. And it's easier for you to look down on him and build yourself up on this deck of cards or house of cards than it is for you to actually, go out in the real world and look someone in the eye and have a conversation and admit that you're wrong. And it's just, there's so much. If I woke up tomorrow and you Men in Black erased my memory and you said, right, you need to rebuild back to this point. What is the one skill that you could take with you to bring you back to this point or become as successful as possible? It'd be communication, without a doubt. Right? Take fucking Toastmasters. Don't take one of my courses. Don't take one of your courses. If you're a bad communicator, right? Like if you have an apprehension of getting up in front of a room of people and speaking, then go do open mic night in some stand-up comedy thing or something, right? Like I love the wrestling endeavor that you've undertaken. because that to me is like there's so much that comes from that that has to do with training more than every single book on your shelf. Like that fucking belt over the shoulder of your skeleton has more to do with our profession than every book on that fucking bookshelf, without a doubt.
And what I love about this, rather than it's just something I really love since I was like 9 years old, it's not only is it a physical endeavor, which is totally different. I'll be a beginner's mindset. I'll make mistakes. It's a new environment, right? I'll have to throw myself over onto my head, which is scary, which proves that I can really get out my comfort zone. I can become resilient because I will land on that head at some point. And eventually I'll have to do a promo, which is dialing my personality up to 11 and communicating in a way that's maybe a little bit alien to me, that enhances the way I talk on these shows or talk to a client or talk to a coach or talk to a student. And when you mentioned like Tony Robbins, the person that came to my head was Darren Brown, you know, the magician. And so if you ever get an opportunity, stick it on Netflix, search Darren Brown, go and watch his stuff. So he's a magician, sort of hypnotist, mentalist sort of thing. And he'll do some stage shows, which are unbelievably good. But he'll also do some shows. He turned a fanatic Trump-supporting racist into jumping in front of a bullet for a Mexican immigrant. He convinced someone through subliminal meshing to push someone off a roof. He's convinced somebody through subliminal meshing to shoot Stephen Fry. Like, he's showing what this premise could be of like how you can influence the brain. And one story I remember he was on Rogan, and he talked about he was leaving a magic convention, so he's top and tail, and there was this guy drunk just looking for a fight. I just started on him because he looked a little bit funny. And he just used the power of a pattern break to de-escalate this person. So he was having a big arm with his girlfriend, he gets in his face, he's shouting at him, and he just looks at him and goes, "You're right, my wall, it's not 10 foot high." And it was such a pattern break that this guy, he just couldn't respond with aggression anymore. And he just didn't know what to do. And he just broke down in tears, sat down, and Darren just sat and like comforted him because he understood this communication thing. It's like, if someone's coming up with this, I'm just going to have something so quick that the brain doesn't understand. So he often gets things where he goes to shake people's hands. So if I went to you and shook your hand, your automatic reaction would do this. It's such an automated response that if I went in that moment, sleep, and I'm not encouraging anyone to do this because I wouldn't know how to get someone out of that people just go. And he does this so regularly. And it's like, we don't know what's capable with, even in that crazy level of extreme, with communication, that if we can just be able to speak to people in a way to encourage them or inspire them, there is so much scope to that people don't test, where you go, but I need to know both heads of the bicep femoris because that's going to help me position someone on a hamstring curl slightly better. And I teach that, you teach that. It's important, but if you can't get someone on the leg curl in the first place, it's pretty useless.
Yeah, what I like about that analogy is that communication is akin to magic, but it's not.
And if you don't see, you talked about my bookshelf. Underneath these books, there is one, a Darren Brown book, and underneath there is playing cards for when I used to do close-up card magic as a hobby.
How good.
So, just to finish off here, we've gone over a lot in terms of almost becoming that authority as a coach. Is there anything we haven't mentioned today of a coach listening to this and going, I want to stand out from the crowd, that they should do?
That's the wrong motivation. That won't last.
Ooh,
you don't care enough. Trust me, you don't. Not that you don't care enough as some sort of like if you're saying in your head, and I've heard this a lot, that you want to be the best coach in the world, it's the wrong frame. And what I've learned over the course of my career is the most important part about problem solving is framing the problems correctly. Most people spend too much time trying to solve a problem. I spend all my time trying to frame the problem. Like, it's not, life is really complicated. Like, there is so much that you are unaware of that's happening because you do not have the tool. I use an analogy that my dog doesn't know the internet exists, and we kind of see like, oh, okay, sure. The dog doesn't have the mental capacities to understand this interconnected network that we've built worldwide. But don't think for a second that you're not in line of a long lineage of stupidity that has no idea how the world actually works, right? Like, you might know a little bit about like like photons and light and energy, and understand that how we're perceiving this VR field. But like there's an entire universe that's going on, and not physically between, are you in London right now, or yeah,
Just
you'd be
outside
in London.
London, yeah.
Okay, so you're in the UK. I'm in Toronto. It's a 5 hour time zone. You're GMT. I'm GMT 4, I think, minus 4. Uh, but like even between my eyes and the screen, there is so much going on that we are incapable of perceiving. Like the visible light spectrum that we can perceive, that shapes our environment, because we're optimized for survival. We're not optimized for truth. So we don't truthfully know what's in between us. We know as much as our devices have been pruned to allow us to be alive. Hard stop. There are so many things outside of our control that we don't even, the amount of unknown unknowns are so incalculable that if you are trying to navigate your environment with this goal of being the best coach, as ill-definable as that is not a proper framing of your problem, right? Because your solution is as ill-defined as your problem. And what does that mean? Do you want to make a lot of money? Then you can start getting into like true motivations and true inspirations and like true sources of both of these things. It's like if you've said to yourself, I want to be, you know what that is? That's like when you watch like a Miss America pageant, or you're watching like Miss Universe. And yes, I'll watch Miss Universe, but not for the reasons that you might think. Mostly because Steve Harvey as an announcer is hilarious. But it's
Agree.
like they always have that like, well, if you were to win Miss Universe, what would you do as a winner of Miss Universe? I would solve world hunger. It's like you're 23 years old. You're from fucking Scranton, Pennsylvania. You are not solving world hunger. Like, let me get that. So we're abundantly clear. But when I hear coaches say, I want to be the best coach in the world, and I look at them and I go, it's the same type of dissonance. Like, what does that mean? How are you going to do that? Reframe it in a way like, for me, my goal is to see every country in the world. That's a goal, right? That's a goal that ensures for error and change in environment. And I'll just take that experience of like being a human being, and I'll take it into my practice as a coach. And whatever distills out of that will be. But it's like if your goal is focused on like I'm going to be the best of any profession, it's like you're lost, man, in my opinion. And look, like I'm just some fucking transient wanderer that talks about working out on the internet. And maybe this is, I'm not selling this to you as like the way to go. Don't sell all your shit and live in a van or do anything like that. But like consider this as a dimension of thought that you could pull you away from a very myopic, singular, dualistic track of up and down and side to side and left to right. It's like the amount of perspective that people lack in this industry is, and I only know this through my own eyes of how little perspective I had, and I only know how little I had because I've been able to gain some, and I've seen the correlation between what some people might say. Hey, look, you've done something with your career. I would say, cool. I've really just tried to do something with my life, and my career is a part of my life. Hence the traveling, hence the art, hence the
Mm,
guitar, and like I work as someone who co-founded an education company. It is not who I am.
mm,
It is not who I am. The education company that I co-founded is a representation of who I am. I am not a representation of it,
mm.
right? And it's just and that's a framing thing, and that's a perspective thing. And it's like, for the love of God, set your sights on something outside of coaching, and paradoxically, you will become the best coach that you want to be.
Yeah.
And of course, because that's the way life works. If you've lived a life and you see things as this never-ending sea of paradoxes, like when we talk about your relationship and off the jump, and I gave you what was, I guess, a paradoxical response to what you've received up until now. It's like, that was not scripted. I didn't know, and I'm not apologetic. I'm excited for you because when you start to see what exists in between the hardwired operating systems that we've been running. Like you ran a particular operating system in your life that was optimized for survival. You're not going to get eaten by a cheetah at the fucking bus stop anymore. You get to optimize for truth now. We are the first generation of living conscious species that gets to optimize for truth and that be the best tool for survival. So do that, right? We're so hardwired. I'm not going to sit there and be like, oh, mate, I'm so sorry. No, because I know what's on the other side of this now. And so, I've gone off the rails and I'm well aware of that, but do that. Go off the rails. So many people are just so like scared. Like people ask me why, like, I know I've amassed a decent amount of tattoos over since last we've seen in person.
Mm.
And people are like, "Oh, aren't you worried about what? What? I'll blink tomorrow. I'll be 60, and I'll blink again, and I'll be dead." Like, get some fucking perspective. Not you personally, and
Yeah.
I've seen you grow over time, and it's been phenomenal to be able to watch it from
Thank you.
various vantage points of the world. Well, no, and the continuation of that, and seeing the catalyzing space you're in right now, change of environment and error. What a massive error calculation that you've just undertaken, right? To be blindsided like that, yeah, thumbs up for the Riverside thing. But holy shit! And then to see the change of environment that has inevitably come, you are in a prime position for evolution, and that's not me or Attenborough. That's like I don't know, depending on what books you read, a couple billion years worth of evolution. So it's like what a coalescence of two of the driving factors of evolution.
Mm.
You're in for a very exciting future ahead, and it's the people who don't try for that just end up as shitty, angry coaches on the internet. And it's like, just go fucking live your life and fuck up, and then the coaching stuff is a byproduct of your life. Your life should not be able. That's why we got into this industry, right? We got into this industry to set our own hours to do what we wanted to do, and we just ended up like spending the rest of the time having the thing that we do dictate how we live our life. It's like, no, no, no. I set up my life in a way where and this is not like on some Ty Lopez bullshit or anything like that, but like legitimately, I work to feed an overwhelming travel addiction. That's it. But I guess it's a positive feedback loop because the more I travel, the more perspective I get, the more stories I have to tell, the more people I work with. The coaching product is like, I guess it's better. I don't know. I get to work with cool people, but like, fuck, dude, it's crazy to me because, and I'll wrap this tangent up with how much impact you can have as a coach on someone's life. You know this, right?
Mm.
This is why you continue to do what you do. And the driving force of the success of that impact comes from you gaining more perspective, gaining more worldview, being a better communicator. What an unbelievable feedback loop we've entered into as a career, where I can help more people if I put myself in a position to constantly grow.
Mm.
Amazing. But we choose to argue on the internet about fucking tricep extensions. Like, oh, it's such what an opportunity lost.
That was a brilliant rant. I remember before we click record, I told you to go off on the
Yeah.
tangents, and I'm very welcome you did. But there's levels to that, right? And it's something that I can totally appreciate that travel has given you this insight, that it is idiots all the way up. I did a bunch of therapy when I was in Hong Kong when I was going through some burnout. And therapy is like, I always look at like, whenever I talk about stress, I talk about stress cup with my students. And you've got three things you can do. You can either empty the cup, which is quick, like try and work on removing some stresses, improving some nutrient deficiencies, manage training volume. You could put a lid on the cup, which is given some supplementation or support to support it and just manage it at bay. Or we could get a bigger cup. That's journaling, that's therapy, that's gratitude, like whatever you float your boat in that sort of hippy dippy world. Now, those things take longer. And it's like ayahuasca is like the emptying the cup for mental space. It's like, look, you're going to shit on the floor and vomit, but at the end of it, you're going to have a different perspective. But therapy, it's so subtle. I kind of went through it. 8 months later, I was walking down Hong Kong Harbour and I was like, fucking hell, my life's changed. I'm a different person. And you realize, like, the great thing about being a personal trainer is I can be considered an expert by colleagues in this small little world. I can go from running an education event for coaches, right? And then going straight to speak to someone who is so much smarter than me in every feasible way possible other than what we are doing right here. And it just gives you that perspective that you don't get from sitting in your home, looking at your webcam on the internet. And that level of perspective translates to our clients because, yes, they want to lose weight, look, have a nice bum in a bikini or have a nice set of biceps. But what you're really selling is you being leaner, you having building some muscle, change your perspective of what you're capable of as a human, makes you want to do more stuff, makes you want to be more active. Your change in perspective changes their perspective, which gets them to do that thing. So I think that tangent, there's huge levels on this. And that sort of brings me nicely onto the last question I always ask everybody, because I think, as we said earlier on the show, that coaches, everyone really, is so scared to be wrong these days. And I've been lucky enough to have a good enough network to have people who are brand new coaches on the show to people that have run incredibly successful businesses, and including yourself. And I will throw back the kindness of watching you grow from when pre-skip wasn't a thing and I followed you and I'd never met you, to meeting you and realizing you're a good bloke, but just a bloke like anyone else. And seen that go even further. And I love supporting people I think generally deserve it. And when anyone asks me what I think of Jordan Shallow, I always go, I don't say he's smart, even though he is. I don't say he's built a good business. I say, generally one of the guys in this industry that deserves it more than anybody else. But people will look at this and they will see the pre-skip brand. And they will see you and they will see this authority in the space. And they see a 60-second reel. And I think we will need to always remind people that we're human. We're all the same, and anyone can achieve what you've necessarily achieved if they have the right framing and the right willpower and the right inspiration, the right work ethic. So what is one thing you have changed your mind on? This can be as hippy-dippy, wishy-washy as you want it to be, or it could be, I thought this about anatomy and now I don't.
I mean, that's funny. This just came up the other day, and it's somewhat of it's very specific. I'm much more, and it has a lot to do with our conversation today. So hopefully doesn't come off the wrong way. I'm much more inclined to just block. And this is again, I need to preface, I need to doubly preface how seemingly banal this activity is. But hopefully, given the depth of the conversation we've had, it will actually resonate past its seeming banality. I'm much quicker to block people on social media. Again, a seemingly, to sort of whatever. Oh, really? That's all how much growth. I had an ethos of operating on the internet where if I wouldn't do something over the internet in real life, I wouldn't do it. And so for me, blocking someone is tantamount to killing them. So if I wasn't able to, if I come face to face with someone and I was willing to kill them over the exchange that we had, then I would block them, which obviously I blocked 0 people before. And it was sort of like a sticks and stones thing. And then I started to realize okay, well, if you take a look at your screen time and then you understand the importance of your environment, and that if you respect the digital environment as a very intrusive, potentially, depending on the outcome of it, part of your life, there are people in my life who deserve the best version of me to show up every single time. Right. And when you kind of, you mentioned dopamine a few times and sort of the driving reward systems behind social media behavior. But I still, and this is as a byproduct of me working in real life so often with people in really high stakes situations. If you fuck up, there are hundreds of millions of dollars on the line. And then, as much as I try to have a resiliency to, and have thick skin, there's a certain point where we're no longer dealing with something that's, useful criticism that would indicate error. We're dealing with an environment that's acting as a net negative, right? There are environments through evolution that have caused the cessation of a species to continue on, right? There are species who are no longer here because the change of environment was so aggressive. This thing can be an absolute fucking ice age for your personal evolution, right? And if you don't respect it, and the thing is, we have control over it, right? And yet people will allow them, and this is where I've changed, is no, and it was probably out of some sort of arrogance or lack of respect of what it is we're dealing with. What are these tools actually doing? What is this environment? What is this ice age that we're carrying around in our pocket to just completely disseminate our personal development? So again, a small thing off of at surface level. Oh, really? You block people on the internet now? It's That's not small, right? If you have like an absolute fly in the ointment of a person who wakes up every day with some sort of preoccupation to making your life miserable, and then even for a fraction of a second, you're not the person that the people around you deserve you to be. If that makes sense? Like they deserve the best version of you, and if you bring anything other than that to the table, because you're too arrogant or proud to just be like, oh, yeah, who the fuck are you, anonymous person? Like, all right, see you later. Probably won't say that to my face. If you say it to my face, then we might, we might have a discussion, and then we might do things live. But that's again small thing that I've changed, and a lot of it comes down to me changing as a person, understanding a little bit more about what could potentially dictate my behavior, and really trying to take control over how I act and minimize the scenarios that I'm in where I'm still reactive. So
Mm.
that's something that has come up quite recently that has sort of, again, it's not like Zercher squats. I'm not like still a huge fan of them, to be honest. I don't think the elbow is a weight loading joint. I'm still not the biggest fan of, like a hip thrust or whatever, which maybe that's
You,
probably
you,
even going to be enough to get
you,
me.
you, me both, by the way. So we could have done another round on hip thrusts, but
Yeah, we'll go down. We'll go down together. And you know what? With you going into the wrestling vocation now, I think me and you as a tag team would be like, I
oh,
wouldn't want to. You
I'm
off the
in for this.
top ropes. I got some finishers too. But yeah,
every
so that's
every Shawn Michaels, every small guy needs a diesel. You are the diesel in this here. You're the big dude. You're the muscle.
gotcha. But yeah, so like little shit like that. I've swayed and I've softened and I've hardened some positions, but like I think to capture, like it's an odd proxy for growth. But I think if you knew me 7, 8 years ago, if you knew me a decade ago, like, and you know me now, you'd be like, oh, that's actually like that's very emblematic of changes that he's made. It's like, you kind of respect the time that you have, and if anyone impacts that in a way, and you start to appreciate the relationships you have, uh, sort of hand in hand with the scarcity of time, and as a byproduct of the scarcity of time, that if anyone really is like, fuck you, see ya, like
Yeah.
nice little magic disappearing act. So that'd be the thing that I think has changed.
I,
One of the
I
things, but I think
yeah. I've asked that sort of question to a lot of people, and it's the first time I've had someone give an answer that's also been the thing that I've changed my mind on recently. And I tell you what, they're like, separation does this to you. I had somebody, I shit you not, and I don't give a fuck if they watch this. I had someone who was a friend of my probably now ex-wife come into my Instagram live and ask me, how's your marriage, live on Instagram? And I'm like, block. Like in the same way I had an argument with a yoga instructor nearby here that he gave me a temper tantrum because I used the word disagree in a post to her. Maybe I didn't word it too well, but I'm like, okay, sorry for wording it badly. And she kept on. I'm like, I don't need people that are that eggshelled in my bye, see you later. And I realize this is when, like, you're already going through a dick kick moment in life and you're already a bit sort of keeled over. You don't need your mental energy taken away anymore. You need the people to say, congratulations. Where's the next step? So I appreciate that. I'm way too white to do the fist bump. Your tattoos make it much more cool for you to do it, but I'll just nod my head. But to close off, where can people find people that don't know you already, which most of my audience are coaches, so they should. But if rare a case that they don't know you or Prescript, where are they finding you or Prescript?
Yeah, Instagram at the_muscle_doc. Prescript. I think so. You can't put a dash in Instagram, which is kind of annoying. And if you're starting a company, don't put a dash in the name of it. It becomes really inconvenient when you do shit like this. So it's actually pre_script on Instagram, or www.pre-script.com. See how much like punctuation that adds to a sentence. Like, do not put a hyphen in your company name.
And what's the next
Big
course?
takeaway.
I think we're going to have a relatively quick turnaround on this show. So what's the next course that's coming live?
Okay, so actually, yeah, L1, so kind of our flagship functional anatomy biomechanics course, 16 weeks plus a textbook, plus a lab section every single day, plus weekly technique labs, plus, Jesus, monthly literature reviews, um, plus emerging ideas lecture series. There's like a lot that goes into this. So if you want a dose of perspective, you want to learn more about like corrective exercise, exercising correctly, bridging the gap between like inner valence, arthrokinematics, joint mechanics, and real world applicability and resistance training, and how to meld those two together, then that'd be the course for you. But huge supportive community on the back end of that. That starts September 30th. We do 4 lectures a week to accommodate for time zones, and we definitely make particular note to appease to our friends under the Queen in the UK. So there will be lectures that are specifically coordinated. That's not going to be in the middle of the night for you guys. Yeah, September 30th, doing one of our 2 remaining in-person events in the Czech Republic in late November. So I think it's November 30th and December 1st. We'll be in Brno, which is north of Prague. And then another event in Singapore the first week of November. I know with your Hong Kong audience, that's not too far. But yeah, that's it. L1 coming up the end of this month. Czech Republic and Singapore in November.
And as someone who has done education with you both in person and online, and a lot of my students have gone on to do your courses off the back of mine, absolutely recommend it. So thank you very much. We didn't get through any of the conversation of the big 3. I'm really happy we didn't. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you having me on, man. It's fun.